Canadian diplomats will meet with President-elect Trump's team at Mar-a-Lago for talks on tariffs and border security.
Canada's finance minister.
Every day. A topic so important, we're dispensing with the introductions here on Fox and Friends. We're getting right to it. I mean, look, this is a big deal, and I'm going to steal the defense analogy from Joey here. What do you do in foreign policy and defense, right? You build up your military. You have as many troops as possible, and you have the greatest and most updated defense equipment. Why? So that you don't have to use it. You want it to be a deterrent to other nations so that they don't attack you. In the same vein, why do you put in a threat of a tariff like this? So that a company that is, quite frankly, defeating you economically, as Trump alleges Canada is doing to us, no longer has that leverage. They have some fear in a way that they haven't had over the last 4 years.
Yeah, and President-elect Trump is not even in the Oval Office yet, but he has some supporters on Capitol Hill pointing out he's getting a lot done regardless of that fact. One of the interesting details about the meetings with the Canadian ministers that they will be meeting with Tom Homan, who, of course, is the incoming border czar. When you think about border security, you oftentimes, of course, think of the southern border, but Canada is the longest border in the world, and they have issues with terrorists coming over into the United States.
Yeah, I think I don't have the number in front of me, but we have a tremendous amount more folks on the terror watch list found at the northern border. It may be because it is actually monitored better. It could be that it's a little bit more secure in some ways. But the fact is, President Trump made a promise. He promised to secure the border. He promised to help us economically and to restore.
Trump has recommended Wayne Gretzky. As a hockey guy, I'm all for that. In all likelihood, let's be realistic with the Fox and Friends viewers, probably won't be the great one, but it could be somebody way more conservative than Justin Trudeau. And so you have to wonder for a moment, is this all part of not only an attempt to get better trade terms for the United States, but to also somewhat influence the election over there and convince the Canadian people, who ultimately will decide who their next leader is, hey, this Trudeau guy hasn't been great for you, hasn't been great for us. Let's get somebody in there who's great for everybody.
Yeah, well, speaking of elections, back in Washington, however, it may be more complicated given that the certification date is in a week and a half.
Listen, I said yesterday, President Trump saved the Republican Party from the aftermath of the Tea Party. I want to walk down memory lane just for a second and explain that. Ted Cruz proved in the Senate, when they were the minority, that you could just complain about everything and not have to be responsible for it and get wildly popular. And that's not a hit at Ted Cruz, but that was a strategy that worked. He got a lot of flash. He'd show up to impromptu press conferences, places. He showed up at the World War II Memorial after we took down the barricades and took credit for that because Barack Obama had shut down the memorials over sequestration. And that has parlayed into the Matt Gaetz of last year, this idea that you can create a protest, not being in the minority, but maybe in the minority of your party, create a protest and kind of the results be damned. Like, regardless of how it ends up, over principle, I'm going to take a stand. So they ousted Kevin McCarthy, and to their credit, Kevin McCarthy did a bad job of not making a deal with Democrats much earlier. That was really his strategic move there that hurt him. They weren't ever going to pass appropriation bills because of the schedule of the calendar. And I don't know that Mike Johnson had a better chance with it this time around. But that is the gripe of Republicans in the House, is that we are supposed to pass appropriation bills to fund our government, have those arguments one at a time, not do this continuing resolution that throws in pork at the end.
Yeah,
that's a very principled argument. But where is the opportunity or even levers to do something different?
Yeah, it's
and
not
that's
to say
the problem.
that the complaints from the Freedom Caucus and those who are very upset about all of this spending.
And they were all happy to go home. When McCarthy had the hot potato, they were all happy to go home, leave their staff there to negotiate, and then they came back and said, we don't like this. This doesn't work. So the deal they made with McCarthy, they reneged on, but then the deal that McCarthy made with the American people
McCarthy
and
is long gone, and Speaker Johnson is currently in power, so we'll see if they can find someone better to do the job. We're going to talk about this topic.
Thomas Massie said he's a no. Hakeem Jeffries said no Democrats are joining. The math gets a little confusing here for the Republicans.
Not confusing, just tight.
Tight, yeah. Good point.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, isn't it?
Also happening in the new year, January 1, which literally is just a few days away, Florida is going to implement a new law restricting kids under the age of 14 from creating social media accounts. So answers on air. But when I think about this, man, I'm torn. Because on the one hand, you really don't want the government interfering in this World Wide Web, as the kids call it. No kids call it that. But anything that sort of borders on speech. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when you're going online and you're doing stuff on social media, it is speech. So that's the libertarian in me. Then there's also the dad that says, I want my kids banned off of this thing until they're married. And I want
Until
them
they're married.
nowhere
Wow. High
near
standards,
social
Todd.
media. I
That's not a
hate
bad
the
play.
fact that they have to deal with this. And if we could ban it, there's no potential pressure there. Their friends can't force them into it, and they can't be forced to do the stupidity that they see on social media. So I'm torn.
This might help parents
Yeah.
in terms of policing what their kids are doing. It's hard to enforce something like this, but really at the end of the day, kids just need other things to do. So get them outside, get them into sports, get them off their phones, give them alternative things to occupy their time.
Yeah, I think bills like this come down to who's implementing them and what their intent is. Because when you take them just on their face, I don't think there's a lot of people that would argue that social media at large isn't good for a 14-year-old. I've got a 15-year-old son, and yeah, I worry because I can't just monitor it all the time. But then you look at who's implementing it. For example, I think I can't remember the country, reported on a couple of months ago that did this type of ban. And what they would do is they punish the social media company. So then it becomes this backdoor way of censoring, right? Well, if you don't censor, we're gonna punish you. That's not very American. That's not very free enterprise.
Well, if it's for someone under 18, there's all kinds of stuff that we do in terms of regulating substances. So on Capitol Hill, when they have the national legislation on this exact issues, they argue it's not necessarily censorship because we do have age limits for all kinds of things that are dangerous to children. And as we've seen with the number of studies, social media actually is very dangerous for teenagers, especially young girls. I mean, the mental health problems that we've seen as a result of this are running rampant. So it's a tough issue and definitely difficult to regulate and to police.
It would just help to have parents that were engaged. That's the real answer, and you can't legislate that.
Yep.
But my fear is that even parents who are engaged, there's still opportunity for stuff to pop up every now and again on a phone. And I know your point, get them outside. That's a great idea. You're from Arizona, though, Katie Pavlich. You can't go outside when it's 0 degrees unless...
You can.
Shouldn't. You really shouldn't.
You should.
I grew up in the
That's how you get
Northeast. Come on.
That's how you get tough, build some character, especially in the mean streets of New York.
Do you hear my voice? I'll be sick until April. Why? Because we live here in the Northeast. Look, I know I said it tongue in cheek. I'd love my kids to not have to deal with this. And so, you mentioned girls. I have 2 girls. I would love to have them not have to deal with the concerns of bullying online, because let's face it, and again, I run the risk of being sexist here, but women have to deal with a lot of negativity from other women. If you'd like to take that mantle and run with it, please do.
Teenage girls are the worst.
So why extrapolate that outside of your school and outside of your friend circle to the world? So with that regard, I'd love to see something done. I just don't know if this is it, but we'll see.
It's tough. It is a tough problem to solve, and I at least applaud people for trying. Maybe this isn't the right bill. It's not from Congress. It's in the state. But see how it works.
It's a good way to test it out.
Yeah.
That's what the states are good at.
That's what this whole country's good at.
Yeah, good point.
Indeed.
All right, let's get to some headlines now, starting with this.
Except for Kamala Harris.
Except for, well, we don't know. Has that been confirmed that she did not? Okay. I mean, look, I think what's important about McDonald's is it really is.
The reporting is he was, quote, forced to.
What, they opened up his mouth and shoveled it in?
Compromise.
Like,
Look, everything in moderation.
That's it.
McDonald's is a great American company, and that was an iconic campaign moment that we will be talking about for many reasons for years to come.
But I love your take on the service industry, because I didn't work at McDonald's. I worked in a restaurant, and I think you just learn something about people more than anything.
Good and bad.
Good and bad. I mean, you see people that...
Angry people.
Angry people, but you also see that you will have to deal with all different types of people, both good and bad, throughout the remainder of your time on this earth, regardless of your job, whether it be the CEO or working in a restaurant.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, well, we're going to move on because House Speaker Mike Johnson's job. Thanks,
Thank you very much. All right, they're getting busy. They're serious about this. They want the criminals out. They have a long docket of people to get through who have committed additional crimes in America outside of
attention. It obviously is a headline. People pay attention to that. It raises some eyebrows. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to disincentivize what we've seen the last 4 years. And saying you are potentially going to be deported with your entire family disincentivizes the birthright citizenship that you're seeing so often over the course of the last 4 years. And when it comes to the humanity part of it that Tom Homan is saying, I think some people out there may say, well, why do we need to emphasize that? Well, it's clear because you need to win the PR battle. The American people voted on November 5th to deport criminal illegals. They did not necessarily vote for what some in the left media would.
Put these mayors and these prosecutors in jail for violating federal law, for harboring illegal aliens. Also, he's giving these parents of children who are born here a choice. And he's made the point before during congressional testimony that in America, if you're an American citizen and you commit a crime that requires jail time, we separate parents from their children all the time. So he's giving them a choice. You can either go together or you can separate, but it's up to you. But we're not going to tolerate law breaking and then these illegal immigrants taking advantage of American goodwill and gaming the system by saying, well, I came here illegally, had a kid, so I now get to stay indefinitely. He's saying, no, we separate parents for violating the law all the time, and they have done that through their actions.
And to your point on humanity, I think you really drove home a really important point when it comes to pointing out what is inhumane and what is humane. Tom Homan doing a good job making that point as well, because again, you have to worry about 26. And I know we just finished an election. Everybody's, into Christmas
oh, no,
here.
Todd,
no, but
not
I'm
yet.
serious. But you have to not lose those people on the margins that voted for Trump because they said something has to change. You don't want to give them any excuse to go back to the way it was. And that's why winning the PR battle, which Tom Homan is trying to do, delineating this actually is inhumane. What we're doing is perfectly fine and is actually better for these individuals and our country is the way to go if you're
There's also a big risk in losing the voters if you don't do what you said you were going to do.
I think you win the PR battle by being truthful. The point I was trying to make is there is no everybody holds hands and sings Kumbaya remedy to this problem. This problem is already there. The inhumanity of it is already there. You don't have to look any further than New York City to see how bad it is. You referenced something that happened last week that has absolutely, really, it's haunted my dreams being in this business and seeing that video. And that's just one of so many Americans. I feel like a court case reverses this quick.
Also, this is just going to make energy for hardworking New Yorkers more expensive, which is why you're seeing these energy firms writing a letter to Governor Hochul saying, quote,
so if you're trying to drive in and around New York City, right, you got to deal with that cost just to come into this neighborhood here. Now, if this ultimately goes through and doesn't get stymied by the courts, it's going to be passed on to the consumers. We all know you're going to have to pay for this when you go to the pump. It's going to cost an arm and a leg to drive in this city. Now, one part of this could be, they're trying to raise revenue. The other thing is they could be trying to eliminate your car, which is what the left ultimately wants to do, whether it's California, New Jersey, here in New York City, in New York State. The fact of the matter is, there is not enough public transportation to get everybody from point A to point B throughout the New York metro area. So you do need a car. At the time, let's put it in what's in it for me terms. At the times when I come in, there are 0.0 trains. So unless we're going to do this live from the Connecticut Bureau every day, I need a car. I need a car to take me in. And so many people who work on this shift and who work these jobs that make New York City the city that never sleeps need to drive in too. It's a horrible idea. Hopefully the courts step in.
Yeah, I think this is one city. I'm going to sound like I'm going back on my own statements that you've seen me say millions of times about personal autonomy, but this might be the one city where every car in the city should just be like some sort of gridded Tesla that you program in where you're going and you go there. Because I spent enough time in this city to know that 90% of the traffic is because this guy in this lane wants to be in that lane and this guy in that lane wants to be in this lane. Yeah. And if there was some sort of organization there, you wouldn't have traffic.
We have organization. They're called streetlights.
This
time of year, there's a lot of people coming to see the Christmas tree, come see the Fox tree. It's absolutely
Sometimes beautiful. I think the only thing they allow the NYPD to do is close off streets.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And that's not a hit against the cops. I'm saying sometimes that's the only thing I think they allow them to do.
So in this segment,
take the subway, which we know is not the safest.
I feel like Joey has advocated for big government telling me what kind of car I want to drive, and for stopping my ability to move freely throughout the city.
The people that lived here voted for these people, and if that's the life they want, that's up to them. I'm not going to condemn them for it. Just don't bring it to Georgia.
I'm going down to Georgia. I'm going to put a big roadblock in Joey's front yard. Be like, I'm bringing New York down to you.
Well, speaking of New York, Biden's former press secretary, Jen Psaki, is scolding Democrats for snubbing Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from a talk. That her takeaway from the November election is that the Democrats should be
You need more AOC.
further to the left, even though the entire country shifted to the right. So just keep it up, Jen Psaki, with that great analysis of what actually happened.
You know, when you're here on the weekends, when I'm filling on the weekends, the person in the middle, Rachel Campos Duffy, and she's not a fan of AOC's ideology, but she is very quick to admit that AOC is effective, and that is absolutely true. Election be damned.
Well, since AOC came into the House, there's been this rivalry between her and former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Pelosi was in a hospital after hip surgery in Europe when all of this went down to make sure that she was not going to be the head Democrat on the Oversight Committee.
She did her dirty from a hospital room in Germany. Look, I think to the point that Psaki's making when it comes to youth, I agree with Joey. I think they do, if they want to win elections going forward, they need to tap into the youth because that has been their bread and butter since the dawn of time, since we had parties. Young people.
Didn't voters just reject that?
No.
This election?
I mean, not every young person, they shifted to the right, but still, if the Democrats want to win elections going forward, they will need to get younger because the MSNBC base of viewers in their demo, which is 80 to 97, is going to die off sooner rather than later. And I apologize if I'm being mean to anybody out there in that age group that watches us. The point is, they need to get way younger. And so, yes, AOC would help accomplish that goal, but to the overall point, I mean, November 5th was a mandate on the right. American people want conservatism. They want things to go back to the way they were in our country since basically our country was founded. And AOC and democratic socialism is not the way to get there. So for Jen Psaki to say that shows that, to your earlier point, she's completely out of touch with what happened in November.
Well, young people, it's interesting because the young men are very conservative and young women are very liberal. So watching this play out culturally as well is going to be very interesting to watch how they vote, but also how they work together and maybe date.
Can I say it? In 2026.
2026.
I just want to freak Pavlich out.
I'm going to end it with this, or my comments are going to be short. I don't know that Americans swung towards conservatism, but they certainly swung towards populism. And I think there is a lane for that in AOC. She's young enough and popular enough among young people that she can be malleable. And populism is that.
And, you know, let's all remember, you're out there for a while to begin with. You're a lot of times in a, how can I put this gently, on national TV, an undergarment that allows you to be in one location and not have to use the facilities. And now you're going to get wet from above. That's an ugly day. No thanks.
More power to the people who go, but just not my thing.
I don't understand it. It might be the worst humanity has to offer. It really might.
Really?
To go out there and crowd yourself with a million strangers and not be able to use the bathroom or stretch your arms, that just sounds horrible.
It's a rough go. This also, though, a rough go. The illegal migrant accused.
I get what she's saying. She's like, hey, let's keep the ship afloat. Let's not start, let's not start remodeling the ship and make it sink on the way down. But listen, Kevin McCarthy lost his job because some Republicans felt like it was necessary to take a stand on how our government spends money and funds itself. Mike Johnson didn't necessarily make any promises. He didn't ask for this. He was asked to do it. But then how fundamentally flawed is it to get rid of one guy for doing something that the next guy does himself? And that's the problem that people like Thomas Massey have.
Yeah.
Now, I talked about Ted Cruz and kind of the way he was when he was in the minority in the Senate, and he could race a stink about something because there wasn't really a consequence. His vote wasn't going to stop something. He did a few filibusters. And then the question is are the folks like Thomas Massey, since it is such a small majority, or did they become the John McCain with the thumbs down, the one that really does sink the ship over principle, but is the end result worse? And I think it's a debate worth having. I just hope they have it figured out before it's time to vote.
Well, Republicans are going to have a choice to make. Are they going to toss out Speaker Mike Johnson, risking the certification of the January 6th
and you said if not
election,
like who?
And putting in, acting President Chuck Grassley rather than President Donald Trump? I mean, all of those points are valid on the principles of how money gets spent, especially when it comes to this last 1,500-page bill, which then got thrown out and whittled down. But that did happen under President Joe Biden. it's a new chance for Republicans to start over, and maybe the timing is not the best. If they want to have this fight in March, when the additional funding fight is going to come up again, maybe that's a better time, but getting the House up and running is probably a priority for the president-elect.
Real quick, Todd.
Yeah.
So the one caveat here is we talk about posturing, we talk about Trump throwing tariffs out there, hoping he doesn't have to use them. Maybe there's something Thomas Massie wants. You know, the big fight going into McCarthy's speakership was we can get rid of you with one vote. They actually changed that back, and so it's not so easy. So is there something that Thomas Massie or some of these others that are saying they're holding out want in writing or in a deal? See, the big thing with the McCarthy stuff is he says there were a lot of deals made that others didn't stick to. So what can they put? And they have to vote on rules and how things are run, the parliamentary procedure. Are there things they can ask for, maybe in how they do the funding bills, that makes them feel good about giving him the thumbs up?
I just have 2 points. One, Mike Johnson was the backup to the backup to the backup to the backup to the backup.
He's the walk-on.
Who is this person, this magical person that's coming out and going to fill this speaker role? Is it going to be Elon Musk like some people? Well, no, he's got a busy job that's going to give information to these individuals who are ultimately creating law. I hated the $1,500-page bill because from an optics perspective, it was everything that the American people voted against.
Yeah.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, this is the coach that you have. Do you want to give him a chance to actually get in the game and coach the game when the Republicans have the Senate and the presidency? My take, let's not sacrifice good for perfect. Let's see what Johnson can do with a unified Republican Party at each of those, in charge of each of those 3 parts of government. And then if you're not happy, you can get rid of him then. But let's see what he can do when Republicans have D.C. Happening today, Canadian diplomats will meet with President-elect Trump's team at Mar-a-Lago. That's a lot. So, I mean, look, I think we all can agree, and maybe we can't, but I think we can. Canada will not be 51. Like, we all know that's not happening. We also all know that Wayne Gretzky, despite Trump's urging, is not going to be in charge of Canada. But this all goes back to this notion of, why does Trump say these things? Why does he put these threats out there? It's because for the last 4 years, the United States has been abused on the world stage. Nobody has taken us seriously. Donald Trump's going out there and saying, I'm taking the canal back, Panama. I'm taking Canada and making it the 51st state. Are these things ultimately going to happen with the canal? I don't necessarily know. With Canada, we know they're not going to. But at the end of the day, if we get better terms that protect the American worker and the American consumer, this is how you negotiate. And it boggles the mind why Joe Biden and this administration basically took a knee to every other country in the world during his administration. Some people call it globalization. Some people call it stupidity. But regardless, it happened. It needs to be undone. And that's what Donald Trump's doing.
Okay, Todd, you say the 51st state isn't happening, but what about the 51st and 52nd if they split Canada in 2?
Like you're saying, like the West Coast,
Yeah.
like Vancouver, British Columbia, they'd go with one?
Because they're very different politically. So
Okay.
maybe we'll get 2.
So there's a vested
If Trump's
interest.
watching, I mean, that's an idea. You're going to see this on Truth Social later
Number
on
one,
today.
let me say, I do hear from Canadians that watch our show, and they do watch our show, and they like Fox News, and they are hungry for some of what we have in this American conservative movement in their own country. You remember some of the things that happened in COVID, what happened with the truckers. There have been a lot of things, and they have their own immigration problem that's pretty bad, and things are happening. So there's a sentiment there that maybe President Trump is kind of tapping into. But there is a selfish interest between Katie and I to have Canada become part of the United States, and that is the ability to go up there and hunt.
They have
Love the
great hunting in
amazing
Canada.
animals, so.
But the
It is a
interesting
cool
thing
country.
is the finance minister is going to be meeting with Tom Homan. Who, of course, is the incoming border czar, to talk about the longest border in the world. So they will be talking about combating that as well.
Well, because fentanyl is not just an issue coming across the southern border. I mean, people are dying because of fentanyl pouring across the northern border as well. And the way that you just said that, I think, is so interesting. The finance minister going to be meeting with Tom Homan, the border czar.
Yeah.
Those two things are inextricably linked. And it's sad that the Biden administration viewed that as an opportunity to create systemic change or whatever that phrase was that they were supposed to be doing down there in Guatemala and Central America, whatever Kamala Harris was supposed to be doing. She took one trip down there. Did she? A root causes trip, and nothing ultimately happened. Biden did nothing. Trump, with Holman, is presumably going to do something. Hey, speaking of doing nothing, if you're on vacation, we're not attacking you right now.
The timing of these vacations also was a big problem, and the optics of it certainly didn't help him when it came to trying to run for re-election and then also getting kicked off of his own party's ticket as Americans watched that and said, where's the leadership? The world is on fire, and the president is sprawled out on the beach.
Joe, I want to take issue with something that you said. You said only one person can be president. That Wall Street Journal article seemed to imply that, no, multiple people can be president at once, and they were for the last 4 years. Getting serious for a moment. This story, I think, not only rocked this city, but it rocked America, rocked the world, just because of its horrificness. Vigil held last night for the unidentified woman burned alive on a subway train here in New York City. The illegal migrant accused of killing her due in court today. Mayor Adams says he wants...
Questions, police officers potentially walking by, not helping. I don't know the story. None of us do. But this idea that there's something called the Daniel Penny effect, that bystanders will now not jump in. I hope that's not true. I hope that was not a reason for someone not to help someone in danger. We have to keep our humanity to talk about things being humane, and our humanity requires us to sometimes put ourselves in harm's way to help others.
And I interviewed Joe Borelli. He said it best, I think, when he said this is a cry for help from Mayor Adams for this city. Let's get to some headlines now. Azerbaijan Airlines announcing this morning it is...
So, Todd?
As you might imagine,
this can be a controversial topic.
As you might imagine, the Pyro household already scheduled, already in a calendar, already in Outlook. It's all set and ready to go because we like to organize things. The weekend is January 4th, 5th. That's the answer.
So it's right after New Year's.
Yes.
You're starting fresh, getting it out of the way.
Done.
So, Joey, as a wildlife conservationist, do you advocate for throwing your tree into a lake so that the fish have an environment?
I got schooled on this last year. Meg wanted to throw it into the river behind her house. And I like to fish and duck hunt that river. So I'm like, maybe we shouldn't add trash to it. And then it's like, no, it floats to the bottom and it becomes habitat. So that was... She definitely had one up on me there. I don't put it into my pond either. What I do with my Christmas tree, I have two brothers-in-law that are fire chiefs, and the fire departments love for you to bring, if you have a real tree, we have one real tree, they love for you to bring your real tree because they can use them to start fires in their burning simulation houses. Now, the reason why that's an important thing to understand is they're also a huge, and I mean a huge fire hazard. I don't know everything about it, but basically you cut the tree and you let it sit for a long time. Even if you're putting water in the base, it dries out and it becomes a big fire hazard. So when is the right time to take Christmas tree down? If you have a fake tree, I don't really care. But if you have a real tree, probably sooner rather than later because you don't want it to catch fire from those.
No, you do not.
Yeah.
No,
you went real serious
inside the
there.
house.
Yeah.
My favorite videos around this time of year are when there are animals in the real trees. You know, there's always the real fake tree debate, but when they find like a little raccoon or an opossum hiding in their tree or spiders maybe.
A squirrel.
A squirrel.
As in Christmas Vacation.
Oh,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
such a good movie.
So
and so many lessons to be learned.
A lot of lessons.
Yes, indeed. Well, people can choose when they want to take it down. We love Christmas all year long.
I think the debate over taking it down is nowhere near as controversial as the debate over when you put it up. So I think we're on the right side of
But
this.
also, it's not just the tree. I mean, does the tree go and then the lights on the house go? Or do the lights get to stay a little longer? Because sometimes it's like the lights are already up, and by the time you get to the point of the year where you need to put them up again, I'll just keep them on all year.
Yeah, I did something real, what do you call it, bougie, I guess, real white collar, real yuppie this year. I paid somebody to put lights.
Oh, come on, Joey Jones.
Well, it's not like I can climb a
Creating
ladder.
jobs.
I mean, come on.
You got a good point. Yeah, you got me there.
And it's not a cheap thing, so those lights are probably hanging out for a while. I'm getting my money's worth out of those.
I was all prepared.
4th of July, and I'm trying to get colors put in them.
I was all prepared to attack you for being like all hoity-toity, and then I remembered.
I pulled the rug out from under you.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that, Joe.
I love it. All right, the Christmas spirit continues.